Back in the days of slavery in the United States, white women had far fewer rights than the males. They were supposed to be submissive and obey innocent wives who would serve their husbands without any questions. When they married, all their wealth, including land, would go to their husbands. All this tells us that white women would not have played any role in slavery. However, that's where reality changes. Despite not having equal rights, white women could own slaves, getting them from their families during marriage, and could have their ownerships even after the marriage. Their husbands thought it was all right, as long as the white wives did not disturb them. But they did not know their white wives were deriving all kinds of pleasures, sometimes sadistic ones, from their black male slaves. So, what white women used to do with their black male slaves? Welcome to a new episode of Black Afric Diary, a channel where we talk about Black African history, culture, arts, and civilization. It's a place where you will see the real picture of Black Africa, its stories, and the events defining it. In this episode, we will tell you the nasty and horrific acts white women engaged in with their black male slaves secretly. Let's get started. During the slavery era in South America, societal norms and legal structures were heavily shaped by patriarchal values, which profoundly impacted the lives of white women. Upon marriage, a woman's identity was largely absorbed into her husband's under the legal doctrine of coverture. This doctrine effectively erased a married woman's independent legal existence, placing her entirely under her husband's authority. The husband was regarded as the head of the household, wielding all power, while the wife was expected to be the heart of the home, which often meant serving as a subservient caretaker. Within this framework, women were often viewed as their husband's property, facing severe limitations on their freedom and autonomy. For example, if a woman wanted to travel, she frequently needed a male chaperone, reflecting the widespread belief that women required male supervision in public spaces. This control over women was further reinforced by societal norms that accepted abuse as a legitimate means for husbands to assert dominance. Physical and emotional abuse were normalized, and wives were expected to remain cheerful, pleasant, obedient, and faithful, even as their husbands engaged in extramarital affairs or relationships with enslaved women. Many white women were painfully aware that the mixed-race children on their estates were the result of these relationships. Confronted with this double standard, some white women sought a different form of power and autonomy, often by exerting control over others, especially through slavery. Ironically, in this patriarchal society, slavery offered white women a form of freedom and power that they otherwise lacked. For many, owning enslaved people became a way to exercise authority and ensure economic security. It is a lesser-known fact that while George Washington owned enslaved people at his Mount Vernon estate, his wife, Martha Washington, significantly increased the number after their marriage in 1759. At that time, George owned about 18 enslaved individuals, while Martha brought 84 more into the marriage. Martha's case was not unique. Many white women in the American South were deeply involved in the slave trade, possessing enslaved people both before and after marriage. Owning many black slaves not only boosted a woman's social status, but also improved her prospects of securing a favorable marriage. After marriage, many white women even went to court to retain legal ownership of their slaves, often winning. For these women, slavery was a tool for asserting personal freedom and securing their place in a rigidly hierarchical society. Because the society was patriarchal, it is misunderstood that women played no role in slavery. For a long time, historians also strengthened this narrative, often relying on writings from a small group of Southern white women who depicted themselves as passive participants. Asking white women about their roles was the basic mistake. However, historian Stephanie Jones Rogers challenged this view by examining interviews with formerly enslaved people, collected during the 1930s as part of the Federal Writers Project, a branch of the Works Progress Administration. That's precisely what a historian has to do. The opinions of the victims are noted, not that of the cruel masters and mistresses. These first-hand accounts revealed a much harsher reality, describing how white women exerted significant control over enslaved people, often from a very young age, and detailing a system where abuse and domination were everyday occurrences. From a young age, White girls were groomed to become slave owners. They grew up in environments where they were conditioned to see enslaved people not as humans but as property to be managed and exploited. Mothers, grandmothers, and other female relatives played a crucial role in this process, teaching young girls that their social status and future security depended on their ability to maintain and manage this system. It was clear that a white woman's social standing and economic future were closely tied to the number of enslaved people she controlled and how effectively she managed them. As they matured, white women used their social status to maintain and exert control over their enslaved workers. They dictated the daily lives of those they owned, using both verbal and physical abuse to assert dominance. Southern households were determined to replicate a slave-based society, aiming to have as many servants as possible at the lowest cost. This was not merely an economic decision, but also a social strategy to reinforce the hierarchical structure of Southern society. Children in these households, both boys and girls, observed and learned from their parents how to dominate their black servants, perpetuating a cycle of abuse and control that was handed down through generations. Stephanie Jones Rogers' book, They Were Her Property, offers clear examples of how rooted these practices were. One striking case is that of Lizzie Anna Burwell, a 3-year-old girl who demanded that her father cut off the ears of a black servant and bring her a new maid. In response, her father gave her more enslaved people as gifts, thus increasing her property and reinforcing her sense of entitlement and ownership over other human beings. The book shows that white women in the antebellum South could actively own property and, by extension, claim ownership over black lives, even in a legal system that did not always recognize them as property owners due to the coverture doctrine. The coverture doctrine stated that a married woman's legal identity was merged with her husband's, effectively denying her the right to own property independently. However, Southern families often found ways around these legal restrictions. Property could be transferred to daughters or female relatives with conditions that kept it separate from marital assets. White women could also create prenuptial agreements or use legal documents like deeds of trust, deeds of gift, and wills to retain control over property, including enslaved people, during their marriages. In Louisiana, for example, women could petition the court to establish separate marital estates if their husbands demonstrated poor financial management, such as failing to budget expenses, accumulating debt, or engaging in reckless spending. These provisions allowed women some degree of autonomy and control over their assets, revealing that two systems coexisted, a genuine patriarchy and a parallel framework that allowed white women to exert some legal and financial influence. This dual system enabled Southern white women to wield considerable influence and autonomy, often using the institution of slavery as a means to carve out a form of personal freedom and power that was otherwise inaccessible to them in a strictly patriarchal society. This changed everything, including how white women were thought about. The idea that 19th century white women were simply delicate, sheltered figures maintaining their homes free from external impurities could no longer be maintained. Contrary to this image, many white women were deeply involved in the institution of slavery and played active roles in its perpetuation. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. Evidence from slave traders, travelers, merchants, city officials, and testimonies from formerly enslaved people all indicate that white women were a visible presence in the slave markets of the time. At the height of slavery, these women were not just passive observers. They actively participated in buying and selling enslaved people, often from within their own homes and social circles. White women held considerable sway in the slave market, particularly in the niche trade of enslaved wet nurses. These wet nurses were black women forced to nurse white children, a practice that was widely sought after by white women who wanted to alleviate the burdens of continuous childbirth and child-rearing. Historical accounts reveal that many white women, exhausted by the demands of frequent pregnancies, felt a form of bondage within their own homes. Hiring or purchasing a black wet nurse allowed these women to delegate the responsibilities of nursing and childcare, granting them more freedom to engage in social activities and maintain their status within elite circles. Depending on their financial resources, white women could choose to hire, borrow, or outright buy a wet nurse to meet their needs, a practice that enabled them to lead more active social lives while leaving the care of their infants to enslaved women. But it did not stop there. Things did not end with just owning slaves. Because white women were deprived of power, they tried fulfilling the dose by carrying out twisted forms of brutality. Not content with merely owning slaves, many white women were known for their cruelty, sometimes so extreme that even their husbands had to intervene to stop them. Wealthy white women, in particular, viewed enslaved men and women as investments that could be forced to reproduce, increasing their labor force. Historical records highlight cases such as that of Henrietta Butler, an enslaved woman who was forced into sexual relations with enslaved men to produce children. After giving birth, Butler was then forced to nurse her mistress's child, leaving her own unattended. This practice of sexual exploitation was pervasive, with many white men sexually exploiting their enslaved women to ensure a continuous supply of wet nurses and additional laborers. You should know that some rich white women even operated brothels, leveraging their ownership of numerous male and female slaves to generate income. Even after the end of slavery, white women continued to exert control over black people by negotiating labor contracts with newly freed individuals. They often desired to maintain authority over young African Americans by taking their children as apprentices. Although this arrangement was marketed as a form of education or training, it was often not much better than slavery. Formerly enslaved people were expected to work under similar conditions for their former masters or mistresses, typically for minimal wages and for a set number of years. Webbe Du Bois, an influential sociologist and historian, captured this reality by stating, "The slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again toward slavery." This brief moment in the sun refers to the period when black communities, with the support of the Freedmen's Bureau, began to establish schools, provide social assistance, and secure some legal protections. However, these advances were quickly undermined by the Southern white elite, including white women, who enacted laws known as the Black Codes. The Black Codes were designed to strip newly freed black people of their civil rights, preventing them from voting, serving on juries, or participating in state militias. These laws created a complex system that allowed white people to continue to dominate and control black individuals. Contract labor and vagrancy laws were particularly effective in this regard, leading to the widespread practice of peonage, a system of involuntary servitude based on alleged debt. By 1915, at least 6 former slaveholding states had enacted laws that permitted the forced labor of black individuals. For example, a black person convicted of vagrancy could be sentenced to hard labor under the convict lease system, a practice that generated significant profits for wealthy white men and women who controlled the labor of those convicted. Historical accounts, such as the memoir of Rebecca Felton, a former slave owner who lived through the Civil War, provide chilling insights into the corrupt legal and social systems that perpetuated racial inequality after slavery's official end. Felton's writings reveal a deeply flawed legal system in Georgia, where judges, often aligned with a dominant white faction, imposed severe penalties on black individuals for minor offenses. For example, a black person could be sentenced to 10 years of hard labor for stealing something as trivial as 3 eggs or a bowl of milk. Felton also recounted the story of a 15-year-old black girl in Atlanta who was sentenced to 5 years in a penitentiary for taking 50 cents from another black child. This dominant faction profited immensely from the convict lease system, generating about $500,000 annually, while judges who handed down harsh sentences to black individuals were more likely to be reelected. However, when the legal system could not be molded as required, violence was used. This is where groups like the Ku Klux Klan became functional. The KKK, notorious for its brutal tactics, including violence, lynching, and murder, aimed to suppress black political and social rights across the country. The Klan was formed in Pulaski, Tennessee, shortly after the Civil War by men who were outraged by the newfound freedoms granted to formerly enslaved black individuals. The organization not only sought to intimidate black Americans, but also provided a socially acceptable outlet for white supremacist violence. The early Klan operated under a veil of secrecy, with a structured organization and elaborate ceremonies designed to support its anti-Reconstruction agenda. In the early days of the Klan, women did not directly participate in its violent activities. Instead, they played symbolic and supportive roles. White women sewed the robes and hoods for their male relatives, reinforcing a distorted image of white womanhood that needed protection from the perceived threat of black men. By the early 20th century, the Klan evolved, leading to the creation of a separate but affiliated group specifically for white Protestant women, the Women's Ku Klux Klan, WKKK. At its height, the WKKK had bases in every state, with particularly strong presences in Arkansas, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Indiana. Much like the male Klan, the WKKK developed a structured organizational hierarchy, much like the Roman Catholic Church. Leadership positions such as Imperial Commander, Klalif, Klokard, Klygrap, Klabi, and Klokan were responsible for various organizational roles, including recruiting members, collecting dues, and organizing events. However, all these activities were underpinned by racism, nationalism, xenophobia, and a fierce commitment to protecting the white family unit. These women were instrumental in embedding the Klan's ideology into the daily life of American society, particularly in small-town settings. They organized a range of social and ceremonial events, weddings, funerals, speeches, parades, christenings, carnivals, and lectures that normalized the Klan's presence in the community. By engaging in these benign activities, such as distributing food baskets to needy families, they seamlessly integrated the Klan's racist and xenophobic ideology into the social fabric. For many of these women, the Klan was not a radical organization, but a social club that aligned with their values and traditions as white Protestant Americans. The WKKK's appeal lay not in its novelty, but in how it resonated with the existing lives, values, and traditions of white Protestant Americans. For many white women, the Klan provided a platform for socializing and enjoying time with friends while promoting a shared commitment to white supremacy and xenophobia. This alignment was particularly unsettling because it blurred the distinction between ordinary social life and extremist ideology. Many of these women were deeply conservative and committed to the cause of white supremacy, wielding significant power within their communities. What do you think? Did the white husbands know their white wives were taking pleasures from black male slaves? Isn't it true that white women played an equal role in slavery? In the comment section right below, share with us what you know about the treatment of black male slaves by white women. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.